Welcome to the HTML5 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host, and actually I had some difficulty determining whether I was going to put this with the HTML5 projects or with the CSS3 projects. I think I'm probably going to list it with both because actually it falls into both categories. So in this group of tutorials, we're going to look at 2D and 3D transformations using the new CSS3 properties for transforms and transitions. And the 2D, 3D transforms, the ability to render 2D and complex 3D environments has been available for quite some time on the web. We've had multiple solutions for many years that have never really had the ability to render these elements cleanly in our HTML documents without the use of third-party products. And we've had these products available to us for a while, these third-party products, but it was never really a clean transition putting these things into our HTML documents. Well, those days are about to end with the advent of the new transforms properties that are making up HTML5 and CSS3. Over the next few tutorials, we'll dive into rendering objects in 2D and 3D space and introduce you to some really neat new properties that are available for us to use as we design our web pages. And I mean, these are very cool. There's a lot of cool things that are going on now with HTML5 and CSS3. We finally have our own toys to play with in 3D space as we enter the world of 3D transforms in CSS3. So browser support. Transform 2D for Internet Explorer has been available since 10.0, for Chrome 36.0, for Firefox 16.0. For Safari, we're still using the Web Rendering 3.2 WebKit rendering engine. It's not fully available yet in Safari. And in 23.0 for Opera, and 12.1, because keep in mind now that Opera is using two different rendering engines. We have the WebKit and the Opera rendering engine. So in 12.1 it's available in the Opera rendering engine, 23.0 for the WebKit engine. The 3D transforms, Internet Explorer 10.0, Chrome 36.0, Firefox 16.0, Safari 4.0 still using the WebKit rendering engine, and 23.0 in Opera with the 15.0 WebKit rendering engine. So we've come a long way in the last few years. There actually is a lot of support now for these, as you'll see as we go through the demonstrations and the tutorials. So we're seeing a lot more support now inside the major browsers for these transformations. 2D and 3D properties, there are a ton of properties that go with these new abilities. We have, and I'm just going to go through these really quickly. If you have access to the presentation, you'll actually have copies of both these slides because there's actually two slides that make up these properties. We have a group of 2D and a group of 3D properties that are available for these. And we're going to go through a lot of these as we walk through the demonstrations in these tutorials. And that's why I said this is going to be a multi-part series. I'm not quite certain how long it's going to be yet, but my guess is it's going to be 5 or 6 parts to this series as we go through each one of these. I want you to get familiar with how they work and how we can implement them in our HTML documents. So you see we've got none, we've got matrix, we got matrix 3D, we have translate, we have translate 3D, we have translate X, translate Y, translate Z, scale X and Y, scale 3D, which is X, Y, and Z. Then we have scale X, scale Y, scale Z. Then we have our rotate, rotate 3D, rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z. Then we have skew X and Y angle. Then we have skew X, and we have skew Y. We have perspective, initial, and inherit. And whenever you see anything with the Z, you know that we're getting into the 3D space because that's our Z axis, which gives us our dimension in our 3D space for our depth. So a lot of cool things going on. So 2D transforms. In part 1 of the series, we'll be looking at the following methods. The translate method moves an element from its current position according to the parameters given in the x-axis and the y-axis. We'll also look at the rotate method, which rotates an element clockwise or counterclockwise according to a given degree that we set up in the parameter settings. And we'll look at the scale method, which increases or decreases the size of an element according to the parameters given for the width and the height of that element in the parameter settings. And that's what we plan to cover in part 1 of this tutorial series. So let's go ahead and move into our development environment and demonstrate what we've been discussing in our presentation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation, get into our development environment. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and make certain that my Apache server is up and running. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Google Chrome, which is going to be my default browser for this particular demonstration. and go ahead and load that start file, and go ahead and bring up Sublime Text 2, which will be my text editor for this demonstration, and go ahead and open up my start file for the demonstration, which is going to be html_start.html, and it's going to be inside the 13001 directory. So the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and demonstrate the translate method. So in this chapter, what I want to do is I want to actually go through a couple of the different methods that we talked about in the presentation. I want to go through the translate, the rotate, the scale, skew X, skew Y, and matrix. And these will be part of our 2D transforms. We'll actually get into 3D transforms in a few minutes. But let's go look at the 2D transforms first. So the translate method. The translate method moves an element from its current position on the stage, or in the browser window, according to parameters given for the X and the Y axis. So it's going to allow us to move an element inside of our browser based on how we actually input the X and the Y parameters. So inside this example, I'm actually going to move an item 150 pixels to the right and 200 pixels down. So let's go ahead and enter our HTML code. The first thing I'm going to do is going to go in the body section of my HTML document. I'm going to type in the section element. I'm going to come down right below that, and I'm actually going to put in a paragraph tag inside my section element. I'm just going to copy some text. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this into my paragraph tag. I'm going to go ahead and close that paragraph tag. And I'm going to go ahead and close my section element. Using that brand new section element in HTML, I'm going to go ahead and expand this just a little bit because I didn't like the fact that it was breaking my paragraph tag inside the tag itself, the tag element name itself. I'm going to go ahead and save these changes. Let's go ahead and do a save as. I'm going to save this as example_1.html inside of my directory. Then I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go ahead and load that example one, and you'll see we've got a standard paragraph that's being displayed inside of our browser window. And again, I'm just showing you the default settings for that browser window. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go up inside my head section. Again, I'm going to keep the styling inside the document itself, embedded in the document, because I just think it makes it easier so we're not switching back and forth between documents. Normally we would actually have this stuff in an external style sheet, but we're just going to embed it in the head section of our document so it's easier for everyone to follow. And now what I'm going to do, I want to actually go ahead and add some styling to the section element itself. So I'm going to actually put in my section element name. I'm going to come down and I'm going to give it a width. I'm going to give it a width of 250 pixels. I want to go ahead and give it a height of 150 pixels. I want to go ahead and give it a background color. And I'm just going to give it a background color of aqua. Use our color names, make it a little bit simpler. I'm going to give it a border also. I'm going to give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and I'm going to give it a gray border color. Let's go ahead and save those changes, refresh our browser window, and now you can see how this element actually appears inside of our browser. And again, the only reason we're seeing the padding and the margins around that element itself is the default browser paddings. But now let's go ahead and use one of these transform settings. By the way, this would be a great time to pause if you want to go ahead and type this in. Because now what I want to do is I want to use the standard syntax for one of our transform settings, which is translate, the translate method. That's the one we're going to actually look at first. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put transform. Then I want to put a space, or I'm sorry, colon, and then I want to put translate, and then inside my parentheses, I'm going to say 150 pixels, comma, 200 pixels. And I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. And now based on what we know about this particular method, this should actually move our box, our section box that we created, 150 pixels to the right and 200 pixels down. So let's go ahead and save the changes, refresh our browser window, and you can see now that that transform translate is supported in Google Chrome, just as it appears. You'll notice my Sublime Text 2 doesn't have these colored yet because these haven't been entered into the terminology yet for Sublime Text 2. By the way, this is the standard syntax for this. I'm just going to go ahead and put this next to it. This is the standard syntax for the transform translate. And that would be the last one we put in if we were going to actually put in our rendering engines, which we're going to do in a minute. But again, this allows us to actually transform or move that box based on the settings we put in the X and the Y axis. If I made this 100, and I could make this, let's make it 100 and 100. Again, based on these settings is how this is going to appear inside of our browser window. It actually moves it based on the settings we have inside the browser window. So again, I'm just going to make it 150. I'm going to put it back to 200. Save those changes. What I do want to show you is I want to show you that it is supported in most of our browsers. Actually, it's supported in all the newer browsers. The one I've got up and currently running right now is Google Chrome. Let's go ahead and bring up Opera. So I'll bring up Opera. Let's go ahead and refresh that in the Opera window. You can see it's supported in Opera. I'm going to go ahead and bring it up in Internet Explorer. Let's go ahead and refresh. You'll notice it's supported in Internet Explorer. And I could actually bring up Firefox, refresh, and you'll notice it's supported in Firefox. So all the new modern browsers are supporting this translate function as part of the CSS3 changes that have taken place. In the event you need to use fallback coding, let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and grab this right below where I put the border. I could actually put the MS, let's put in the Microsoft fallback, which is transform, put in my colon, translate. Then again, just like we had done before, 150 pixels, put in the comma, 200 pixels, and then I could just copy this line, and that's for the Microsoft rendering engine. Come down right below that for Internet Explorer, by the way. Right below that, I could actually put in the WebKit rendering engine. Same thing, transform, translate, and that's going to be, it will support our Safari browser in the event that you need to go back and support older versions of the browser. But again, as we demonstrated in the original demonstration, all the new modern browsers do support this. So I think the next one we're going to look at is, let's look at the rotate method next. All right, so let's go ahead and get into another demonstration. So I wanted to go ahead and demonstrate the rotate method. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as with this file. Let's go ahead and do save as, save it as example_2.html. Then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull out all of the existing code that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this code. Save my changes. Excellent. Now the rotate method rotates an element clockwise or counterclockwise according to the given degrees that we actually put in the method itself. So in this example that we're going to set up, I'm actually going to go ahead and rotate something 90 degrees. We'll play with the rotation scales. I'm going to go ahead and update and load up my example 2 so we don't have anything on the screen. I'm just going to go ahead and put an H1 in here. I should have actually did this with the last one so we can actually know what we're doing, the rotate method. Go ahead and close out that H1 element. And I'm going to do the same thing up here, the rotate method, so that we can keep track of where we're at inside the demonstrations. Go ahead and update my browser window. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and add some HTML code inside of my body. So right below that H1, I'm just going to go ahead and add a section. And I'm just going to put some text in there. Down the line, put some text, this normal section element. No rotation is going to be applied to this, and then I'm going to go ahead and close out that section element. Come down right below that, I'm actually going to put in another section element, and I'm going to give this one a class of rotate. Got to make sure we enclose that class inside quotation marks. Come down right below that and close out that section element. And I'm just going to have some text inside that also. And it's basically the rotate method rotates an element clockwise or counterclockwise. This element, and actually it's a div element, or a section element, not a div element. This section element is going to be rotated 90 degrees to start with. So that we can actually rotate that 90 degrees to see how it's going to appear in our browser. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser window to bring in the paragraphs. Let's go ahead and save all these changes. Then refresh our browser window to bring in all these paragraphs. And you'll see we have just two standard paragraphs. I didn't put them in paragraph paragraph tags, but they are in section tags. And actually, for proper formatting, they should be in paragraph elements. If we're following a best practice, which we are with all our tutorials, your text should always be enclosed in a paragraph element if it's inside of your body element, unless it's specialized text, like headings or span elements or stuff like that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and refresh the browser window. We've got our two paragraph elements now inside of our body. And the first thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and add some styling between our style tags so we can actually set up how we're going to look at this. So our standard style tags, our style elements, I'm just going to go ahead inside my style elements. I'm going to format my sections, and those sections are going to have a width. I'm going to give them a width of 300 pixels. I'm going to give them a height of 100 pixels. I want to give them a background color, and we'll just give them a yellow background color for this example. I want to give them a border, and the border is going to be 1 pixel, solid, and we'll just make it a black border. I want to go ahead and save those changes, and then now, based on the fact that both of these are in section elements, we should actually see that occur. Our sections now become, actually they're a little bit high, let's make them 50 pixels high. Based on the text that we have. Not high enough. Should have left them where I had them. There we go, that's a little better. And now all of our stuff's enclosed nicely. Now, in order to demonstrate the rotate method inside CSS3, what I can do is I can actually come inside my section right below where I've set up the formatting for both of our sections, because keep in mind, this applies to both the sections in our HTML document because they're both inside section elements. But now if I want to target just the one I want to rotate, remember I've set up one section element with the class of rotate, so I'm going to say section and then dot rotate. So in other words, I'm targeting now the section element that has a class of rotate. And I'm just going to add one style to that. It's going to be transform, colon, and then rotate. And then inside my parentheses, I'm going to put in how many degrees I want that to rotate. For the first demonstration, I'm just going to have it rotate 90 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. By the way, this is the standard syntax. I'm going to put that note next to that. This is the standard syntax for the rotate method. Save that, refresh our browser window, and you'll see now that we've actually rotated that one section element with the class of rotate. We've actually rotated 90 degrees. I could rotate this however I wanted to, in whatever degrees I wanted to. If I wanted 45 degrees, I just make it 45 degrees. If I want it 27 degrees, I can make it 27 degrees. Whatever I want to rotate it at, I can actually put that inside that element and rotate that box based on how I set up that transform for that particular rotate. I can also use negative values. If I want to put a negative number here, I could rotate it negative 27 degrees. Keep in mind, if this were 0, it would be standard. So it would be like there was no rotation on it at all. This is just basically how it appears without a rotation method. And then anything above or minus or positive. So a plus 90 would rotate it 90 degrees. A negative 90 would do the same thing in the reverse direction. You notice that our text changed. It's rotating it actually in the reverse direction. And anything in between. If I wanted it 180 degrees, notice the text is reversed. It's almost like a mirrored impact. 270, the same thing. So there's a lot of interesting things we can do with this rotation method inside of CSS3. We also have fallback code, just like we did with the other one. Let me go ahead and put this back to, I'm just going to put it back to 45 degrees. Makes it a little bit easier to see what we're doing here. But we also have our fallback code, just like we did with the other one. I can come up in the rotate in the event I'm concerned with older browsers. Oh, and by the way, just like before, this is supported in most all our browsers. Let me go ahead. I've got Google Chrome by default. Let's go ahead and bring up Opera. You'll notice it works in Opera also. I'll bring up Internet Explorer. Let's go back, refresh our window so we can actually get example 2. Internet Explorer is working fine. Same thing with Firefox. Could bring up Firefox. Let's go back, refresh the browser and load up example 2. And you'll see it's working the same way in Firefox. One thing I do want you to notice in Firefox, notice that we've actually, our boxes are a little different size because degrees is actually outside the box, and I don't believe it was outside the box in any of the other ones. And that's based on the default font size for that particular browser. So again, that's another good reason why you want to check your browsers and make certain when you write your code that you're checking it in all the different browsers, because a lot of these have different size defaults. And you'll want to either zero those out with a CSS reset as you're setting up your pages, or you'll want to just make certain that you've checked it. And if something does appear a little different, you may have to go in and change your CSS styling so that they appear consistent across the different browsers. So our fallback for the rotate, very similar to what we had done in the previous example. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in for you to see. For our Microsoft, our fallback is MS Transform Rotate, just like we had done before. I'm going to go ahead and copy that because the fallback for Opera, or for the WebKit, I'm sorry, is WebKit. And again, this is more for Safari. Microsoft, obviously, Internet Explorer 9 and Safari, based on our formatting. You may need it for some of the older browsers inside Safari. That would be WebKit, Transform, and then Rotate. And then again, you just put in your degrees. You want to make sure, obviously, that these match how you're trying to set it up so that they will appear the same in the new and the older browsers that support the Transform Rotate method in CSS. So I think the next one we're going to look at, we looked at method. Let's go ahead and look at scale. Will be the next one that we look at in CSS3. All right, so in the next demonstration, we're actually going to look at the scale method in our 2D transforms. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as on this. Let's go ahead and save as. I'm going to save this as example number 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove our code that's actually in here from our previous example. Let's go ahead and get rid of all the code. I'm going to go ahead and go back and refresh and reload example number 3. There we go. So the scale method increases or decreases the size of an element according to the parameters given for the width and the height. So inside the scale element, we have 2 parameters we can enter, a width and a height parameter, and that determines how this element scales inside of HTML. And we got to remember, it's actually scales from the center. I'm going to show you what I mean and why that's important to understand based on how we set our margin settings. So let's go ahead and enter some HTML into our body of our HTML document. So basically I've just put in the scale heading, which is the scale method. I'm going to go ahead and change this up here to the scale method. Going to go ahead and save those changes in our example _3. And I've got my H1, which talks about the scale method. Then I've got a paragraph. The scale method increases or decreases the size of an element based on the parameter settings that we set. And we're going to demonstrate that in a minute. Then I set up another section element with a paragraph inside. And this section element is 2 times its original width and 1.5 times of its original height. So let's go ahead and save these changes. Good time to pause if you want to type that in. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser window, and you can see now we've got the headings and our paragraphs that are being displayed inside the browser window. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and set up some section styling so you can see what I mean by the scale element inside of CSS3. So let's go ahead and set up our section, because that's what we're actually going to style. Remember, we've got this paragraph that we're going to scale inside of a section element. And the first thing I would do is let's give it a margin of 100 pixels. And we all know, based on how we understand CSS, that that's going to be 100 pixels around the entire element itself. I'm going to give it a width of 200 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and give it a height of 100 pixels. I want to go ahead and give it a padding of 5 pixels, and that's going to be around the entire element, because remember, it's a block level element, it's a section element. I'm going to give it a background color of yellow, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, and black. And I'm going to go ahead and save all these changes. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser window, and you should see now our section element, based on the settings that we've given it, has a margin of 100 pixels all the way around it. It's 200 pixels wide, 100 pixels high. We've got 5 pixels of padding around the text. I've given it a background color of yellow, and you can see that nice little 1 pixel border that surrounds our element. But now in order to scale this, all I have to do is I have to come down in here. I'm going to skip a line just so we can keep this separated. So they transform. So again, we're using that transform property inside CSS3. And I'm going to say scale, because I want to use the scale method. And I'm going to say 2, comma, 1.5. So what I'm doing is I'm scaling it 2 times its original width and 1.5 times its original height. So I'm going to go ahead and save that change, refresh my browser window. And the one thing I want you to notice right away, let's go ahead and rem this out for 1 moment so that you can actually go back and see this again. I want you to note where the scaling is coming from. Notice it's scaled from the center point of the element. So if I take it back, now watch when we refresh the browser window, watch how it scales. It's actually going to scale from the center point of the element itself, and it scales out. The reason it's important to understand that, let's suppose I gave this a 50 pixel margin. Save the changes. Let's go ahead and rem out the scaling for 1 second so you can see that in normal flow, it's not going to have an impact. Obviously, it's going to move our box a little further up and a little further to the left because we only gave it a 50 pixel margin. But when I transform and scale it, watch what happens, because it's being based on the center point of the object, of the element. Some of it's now off our screen. Because we scaled it twice its original width, and we didn't give that enough inside the margin. So if I make this 100 pixels and save that change, now we'll have just barely enough to show that entire element once it's scaled. So keep that in mind. Your margin settings, your padding settings, because it's working off the box model inside CSS, it is going to have an impact on this. We can also do the scaling. Notice I had 2 and 1.5. What if I said 0.5 and 0.5? What if I want both these to be just half of their original size? It can do that also. So it scales in both directions. It can scale up and down, which gives it, if you think about it, this actually can get quite interesting using some transformations. If we wanted a box to appear like it was coming towards us, let's go 25 and 0.25 and 0.25, we could actually have that transform transition to us, adjusting the scaling and animation mode in CSS3 to have this thing grow into our presentation. Kind of cool, and I'll actually do a tutorial on it in a future exercise, but I just want you to be aware of some of the things that we can do with this scaling transform. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to 2 and 1.5. Go ahead and save those changes. Remember, the first one is our width, the second value is our height. And now we're back to where we started from. And again, we do have the fallback syntax in this also. Very similar to what we've been doing in the past for Microsoft. It's ms/ and then I just take this and just put this right there. So I got ms/transform : then I have my scale with my values. And the same thing with the WebKit rendering engine. Let's go ahead and copy it, paste it in WebKit. And again, this is supported in all of our recent browsers. All the updated browsers do support this. I can actually bring it up right now. We're in Google Chrome. Let's go ahead and bring it up in Opera. I'm going to go ahead and bring it up in Opera. Let's go back and refresh and bring up example number 3. So it is working in Opera also. Internet Explorer, same thing. Let's go ahead and go back, refresh, bring up example 3. You can see that it's working in Internet Explorer also. Don't need the fallback for this. It is going to work in Firefox also. Go ahead and go back, refresh, example number 3. So again, But again, you can see that Firefox is using a different default size font, and it kind of makes our text look a little bit different inside that actual box. And that's something to be aware of as we're doing these. Again, a good CSS reset will always come in handy when you're doing stuff with a bunch of different browsers and you want to make sure you have consistency across your browsers with the way in which you're styling your pages. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this portion of the tutorial, this part 1 section. And in part 2, we're actually going to go back and we're going to start looking at more methods inside of our 2D. We've done our translate, our rotate, and our scale. I think the next one we're going to look at in the 2D world is the skew method, the SkewX method inside of CSS3. So I look forward to seeing you in that tutorial.